So after Gearbox's panel this past weekend at PAX, we actually got a bunch more news about Borderlands 4 over on Twitter from Randy himself, along with other Borderlands 4 developers. So we're going to be going through all of these different things that we found out regarding like boss resetting and how that system is going to work a little bit more, different farming systems that they're going to have. And they also talked a little bit more about build diversity and also their balance philosophy. So we're going to be going through all of that and everything that you guys need to know. I tweet about this stuff all the time, so if you want to see that as it's actually happening, make sure you guys go follow me over on Twitter. But let's go ahead and go through all of these details that we found out over the past couple days. So over on Twitter, Jolt made a tweet basically giving like an example of what the new like boss resetting might end up doing, where it will actually just end up taking longer than our normal save quits with this like teleport screen and all of that stuff. He messed around with like the timings of it just as an example. But we did get a response from a Borderlands 4 developer saying that it takes a fraction of the time of his example and is much faster than save quitting. So that is really good news. There was a couple other people over on Twitter kind of theorizing like what happens if it ends up being slower than save quitting and now save quitting just no longer works. Like it's not going to reset to the bosses. You're going to have to use this new system. So that is a very good worry to have thrown out the window now. And I'm really, really glad that this new boss resetting is going to end up being a much faster and better experience for farming. The only thing that we don't know with how it all works is with like open world bosses, like basically little mini bosses around. We don't know if it's going to be like on a timer. There's going to be like a whole world reset option, anything like that. We're still waiting on confirmation there. If it ends up being a timer, that's going to kind of stink. But if it does end up being a timer, hopefully we can still save quit, even though it's not ideal. Hopefully there is just a way of resetting those open world mini bosses much quicker than actually save quitting. Next up, we heard a little bit more about the farming systems that are going to be in Borderlands 4. So basically, a user was asking one of the developers if there's going to be something like the Wonderlands bunny system where you can kind of target specific loot, and it's not going to be like the bunny system. And what they ended up saying was Grant Cow over on Twitter said, there's going to be systems that encourage players to try all sorts of content in the game. We wanted to provide targeted ways of acquiring specific gear, but also make just playing the game in general have rewarding experiences that hopefully don't feel like chores. So to me, I'm wondering if like there is going to be different zones around the map that have like, hey, you can now farm shields in this zone. You can farm Jacob's weapons in this zones, Malawan weapons in this zone, and so on. And maybe those will rotate around so you can kind of farm different areas of the map and experience all parts of the game looking for the things that you need. We don't know what that exactly is yet, but that would just be my theory on what it might end up doing. But we'll have to wait and see once we see a little bit more about the game. But there are going to be ways of targeting different pieces of loot across all experiences in the game, which is really good to hear. Then regarding build diversity in the game, Moxie was on Twitter talking about how excited he is for just like Borderlands 4 builds in general, just the amount of skill points, well, skill tree nodes that we have, and all these different things that are going to be in the game, and just how different everything's going to be, which is really good. And then Grant Cow also went on to respond to him saying their number one goal across the combat teams, there's a lot more freedom of expression, not just with gear and skills, but with movement and speed too. Speed world farming, I quote, will become a viable build for those that don't want to just farm bosses, which is really cool. And then also freedom of expression also applies specifically to gear. We listened to the community and largely moved away from needing to funnel into a single piece like an anointment. And they're going to talk about that in a little bit. But that is really good to hear, where you can have all sorts of types of builds. Now, with all this open world stuff, that is good to hear that there's going to be like speed world farming stuff. So you want your character to move quick. You don't really need to take on like the most tanky of enemies. So maybe you focus a little bit more on AoE and speed as opposed to just like single target damage, which is really cool. And you don't have to just focus it all into like one piece of gear. So that in my opinion is really good to hear about the build diversity philosophy that they have. So there's going to be a lot of different ways we can build. And I think there's going to be a ton of uniqueness across builds. Like, I feel like at the end of Borderlands 3, things started to feel very same with the amount of skill points we have. There's basically only a couple ways to build different skill trees across all the characters. You were able to get basically everything that you needed with the amount of skill points. So hopefully that part, I talked about that in our previous news video, just like around like a level cap of, 60 or so, maybe by the end of the game would be really good. And that way there is still just actual true uniqueness with builds when it comes to our skill trees, but also just the kind of areas that you want to focus in, like speed world farming or bosses. So overall, really good to hear from Grant about that. Last up, we're going to be talking a little bit more about Gearbox's planned balance philosophy. Now, this is strictly coming from Randy Pitchford himself. He was responding to our user Ritsu about kind of the performance and balance of the game. And he said the target is 60 FPS, which is very good to hear that if you're on a console, should be getting 60 FPS, and hopefully PC, we can get pretty good frames out of a decent system, but we're going to have to wait and see for sure there. But the big part is he also said F balance, straight up F balance, make a sick build with some god drop loot and melt bosses, be a legend. Now, this was something that was a problem both in Wonderlands and Borderlands 3 when they launched, was things were really good and they made like pretty reactionary nerfs, hard nerfs across the board. And that's still a lasting impact to this day. Everybody still talks about how Borderlands 3, all they did was nerf everything, while that is actually just not the case. They nerfed things that first month, and then from there, for the next, almost 2 years, all they did was buff things by insane amounts, like 1,000% buff here, 1,000%. Like, it was crazy, the buffs that they were handing out in Borderlands 3, but that just goes to show the impact that these reactionary nerfs that they've had in the past have on the long-lasting, outlook of the game. So that is good to hear that hopefully in this case, we're going to be a little less reactionary. There is still very much a need for balance, even in a game like Borderlands. I'm still very pro nerf where it's needed. Like if there's insane outliers that are negating, the need for anything else, like they need to be toned down, or if there's some like really big, bug exploit that makes everything trivial, there are some scenarios where nerfs are needed or bug fixes in that case. And then he went on to talk about, who's going to be in charge of that. Because Randy also replied to K6 saying usually Graham is the guy who cleans up after other people's balance mess. With this game, he's the one on top of design for all shipping numbers and systems. It is inevitable that with so much loot and so many procedurally generated combinations, there could be some game-breaking drops they may not have anticipated or that we may not have discovered yet. I'm eager to see how Graham will handle this. The case would have to be extremely rare and likely very strange for me to usurp his decision or come over the top of his authority. I trust Graham's justice to be fair and swift, even if at times it may be merciless. So this gives me a little bit of like conflicting, vibes from what Randy was just saying about like F balance. Because, at the end of the day, Randy's not like fully in charge. He's mostly leaving it up to Graham. And we don't know how Graham is going to, decide to balance the game. And once again, nerfs are good. Things do need to be balanced. But at the end where he says like, if it is swift and merciless, that could be, kind of code for reactionary. So I really hope that's not the case. Hopefully, everybody just lets things settle for like the first month or so of the game, see how it all plays out, and then kind of go from there with the balancing and make sure the balance goes well in the first place. So that's my hope with like kind of the launch of the game. But there is something very promising that they also said. And that is Randy went on to saying that they've been talking about potentially having a quote unquote buff council of players who know the heck out of the game and want to work with us to see how underpowered weapons can be made more interesting compared to what is inevitably OP. So that could be really good. You could have, them giving Gearbox advice on how to potentially nerf things without making it, just completely obsolete or ruining it entirely, while also, telling them how they can buff other things. Because sometimes nerfs can be done with buffs. Like there are times where, something is very prevalent, it's, super meta, quote unquote. But that's because there's just not a lot of other options. But if you give other options to compete with it, that can be just an indirect nerf without, taking the fun away from people who still want to play with that one specific thing. So that is really, really good to hear that they're looking on bringing on people, who really know the game, because the Borderlands community has a lot of very, very knowledgeable people in it who are super big into the math, know exactly how all of the damage formulas work and all the ins and out of the game. Like they That's all they do is test these things and science the shit out of it. So that is really, really good to hear, and hopefully that ends up working out well for Gearbox. Yeah, that's pretty much everything that we found out over on Twitter after PAX, and just a little bit more information about Borderlands 4. So I just wanted to share that here in case you guys missed that and get you completely up to date. We're going to have a ton more Borderlands 4 news here as the summer goes on, so if you guys want to stay tuned for that, make sure you are subscribed here or go follow me on Twitter if you want to see, things like that I talked about today. If you want to see that news live as it happens, because I'm following all that stuff super closely. But yeah, thank you all for watching this far. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you all have a fantastic day. See ya.